Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. It is Tuesday night here, which means it is time for a Tag Tuesday book tag, and this week it is the End of Days tag, originally created by Bob the Bookerer, and I also saw it on Janet Remembered Reads and Jim from Books, Reading, and Stuff. Really enjoyed all of those. I'll link those videos in the description box below, but let's get to the end of this. Prompt 1, Prophecy. A book that contains a prophecy or promise, whether it comes true or not. Well, in the Tanakh, there are the Hebrew prophets, including two of my favorites, Amos and Habakkuk, particularly the end of Habakkuk in chapter 3. But in other works, we have Njal's saga, all sorts of great prophecies and interesting concepts of fate, fortune going on in medieval works, but the sagas have some great ones. Njal's saga is just kind of takes off with some at the beginning where the girl Halyard has various family members basically mentioning, gosh, pretty much everybody who comes into contact with her, it's going to be a disaster. And she loses multiple husbands who die violently throughout Njal's saga. But another interesting sort of way of looking at prophecy, I think, is through various science fiction or fantasy works where they have the concept of being able to predict the future, not necessarily in like a prophetic nature, but perhaps using, advanced technology or something. For example, the great psychohistorians in Isaac Asimov's Foundation, led by none other than Harry Seldon. All right. Prompt 2, Apocalypse. Literally an uncovering, but I'll stay covered up. A book that talks about the end of the world. Well, I think for their minds, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon certainly fits the bill there. But we have other more literal apocalypses, such as those in the Poetic Edda, another great work from the Middle Ages, particularly in the Circus prophecy, where Garm bays loudly, and that hellhound is right, because Surtur is coming to end everything in a fiery conflagration. And sort of on the other end from fire, we would have water, like the great flood narratives, including a super duper ancient one from Mesopotamia, written on clay tablets, the Atrahasis narrative. Atrahasis is mentioned under a different name in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but that's a good one to check out. Prompt 3, Winter. A book that talks about the end of the world, end of the year, and or icy or cold conditions. Well, I live in the southwestern U.S. in the desert, so we don't really have a lot of those icy or cold conditions, but The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin really took me to those cold, bitter nights on Carhide. Great science fiction book. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. There are also, though, books set on Earth that are very cold and wintry, such as Out the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, which has a strange expedition towards the South Pole and alien creatures that are discovered there. Danger awaits at the South Pole. I mean, literally, like danger would await for any humans at the South Pole. But in that narrative, there are monsters, not unlike those in Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr., which I mentioned last week. Prompt 4, Nighttime. A book that focuses on the night or has some interesting scenes set in the dark. Well, Nighttime, maybe The Night Circus by Erin Morganstern. But I haven't actually read this book yet. I'm hoping to this year. So I don't know if any of it is set at night. It's just in the title. So perhaps the tales from the 1001 Nights. Not necessarily all the tales, some of them are, but the whole frame narrative with Scheherazade, that's set at night because she's telling the tales every night in order to stay alive. So that might work. I mean, if we're trying to think of something that's primarily set at night, perhaps The Massive Dream that is Finnegan's Wake. But if we want it to be a book that's actually set primarily at night and people are awake and doing stuff, I'd go with In a Lonely Place by Dorothy B. Hughes. Dorothy B. Hughes. Great novel. All sorts of smoky, moonlit night scenes that are very dangerous and frightening. It's a great thriller. One of the best I've ever read, honestly. Prompt 5, Later Life. So we're getting to the end of the days, literally in Prompt 4 with the end of a day and now the end of one's days. Prompt 5, Later Life. A book that talks about aging or prominently features older characters. Well, one of the things that I appreciate about science fiction is the way that the characters don't have to be bound by a human lifespan of roughly 75, 80 years. Because I think one of the things that's cool about that is it can allow a science fiction writer to create narratives that don't view time from that human lifespan like limit. A lot of, we always joke about like, oh, you got to play the long game, or you got to think ahead. And often we're talking about like 3 years ahead, maybe 2 years ahead. Sometimes it's about 4 hours ahead. But when we start to think about real, like, massive changes socially, sometimes that's much more than just one human lifespan that we're talking about. And so a work like God Emperor of Dune by Frank Herbert really allows us to explore that idea, I think, from a different perspective. Similarly, a novella, The Ballad of Beta 2 by Samuel R. Delany, has a character who's been around so long that like entire civilizations in space have utterly changed, and their languages have changed. And there's this one space being, this sort of strange alien being that has observed all of it and is able to interact with a human who's almost an archaeologist type character who's investigating it. This is a fun novella, by the way. But if we want just one human lifespan character, King Lear from Shakespeare. Great, sad, horrifying play, but it's incredible. Prompt 6, Until the End of My Days, a book that you think will stick with you for life and or that you can imagine rereading later and still getting a lot from. Well, one of the books that I sincerely expect I'll be reading to the end of my days would be Possession by AS Byatt. It's one of my all-time favorite novels, and the nature of it allows for rereading. There are so many different aspects to it, the ways in which it is metafictional, postmodern, the ways in which Byatt crafts poetry from Victorian poets and has their letters and all of like fairy tales interspersed within a narrative set in the 1980s in the UK as two literature. One's a professor, the other's doing postgrad work, are investigating all of it and their lives. It's a fascinating book. It's apocalyptic in the sense of an uncovering. We have all sorts of ideas and treasures unearthed and uncovered in this book. It's wonderful. But if we're talking about a book that I might be reading to the end of my days in order to finish it, I suspect that might be The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki Shibuku. Looking forward to reading this at some point. Prompt 7, At the End of the Day. At the end of the day, that cliche or trope that annoys you. It's probably realism in general. And I think more and more as I've been reading, I've found I'm less and less interested in books that are just going to ramble on about a life without any real sense of anything that is truly novel or interesting. I find that there's a lot of realism novels going back to the 19th century, but certainly up through now with more autobiographical fiction narratives that are highly realistic, where fundamentally I don't think they're that different from getting like a celebrity gossip magazine, because in those celebrity gossip magazines, from what I understand, I don't read them, but it's sort of just a who's dating whom, who was seen with whom, what they ate, what they were wearing, and what their house looks like. And if we really think about a lot of like 20th century, 19th century novels, that's really all it is. It's who's with whom, who's interested in whom, what they're wearing, what their house looks like, maybe what they're eating. And so I find more and more I want to read something that's different, something that has some unique flavor. Now I'm interested in reading something that is from a totally different perspective from my own, that allows me into some world that I don't live and probably never will live. I'm down with that. But stuff that's just regurgitating, there's a lot of those. There's a lot of those narratives. I don't find myself reading too many. So in terms of tagging people, Michael K. Vaughan, just because I did his tag last week. I'll tag Shelley Swearingen. I haven't tagged her in a while. Duncan McCurdy, and I'll tag Fraser Simons. So have a good one, everybody. Thanks.